Good morning. Welcome to the Powerful Moments Sunday Encourage group this morning. I keep wanting to call it Sunday School class. Encourage group. So glad you're here. Merry Christmas. Hope your Christmas season has started well and having a lot of good celebration and praise for this time of year. Martha, I know you got an announcement about Nona. So.
I talked to Nona last week and at the party, and they have added some more days onto her therapy. And so I was going to see if there were any volunteers that could maybe this will be all of it. You know, there are 4 more days. One is Monday. Really? Okay. Oh, you've already talked to her? Oh, okay. Okay, well, okay. Well, the 20. Oh, okay. Well, Debbie, go for it.
Thank you, Debbie.
Okay, yes, thank you.
So, you're going to qualify as an Uber driver here soon, so. Good. Okay.
And talked to Linda Williams this week, and Linda's doing great as far as her knee goes. She's walking now with a cane, but she has had a lot of trouble eating, and food has just disagreed with her. And I think Novella knows more about that than I do, but is she able to eat much now? Oh, that's good. That was the worst thing. I think that maybe not the worst, but she had a lot of trouble with that instead of just with her knee. But it sounds like her knee's doing well.
And Novella says she's doing better eating since you weren't online, couldn't hear that. So, yeah. Okay. Other announcements this morning?
Tuesday's the luncheon. The women's luncheon.
Luncheon's Tuesday and
at 11.
The Compassion Hands table set up out there, and the pound. Who's ever heard of a pounding? By the way, raise your hand. Yeah, well, more than half, so that's good. So anyway, the pounding table or gifting table, we'll call it, is set up out there for Adam and Sarah. So if you would like to give them a pound of something, they've got a list that came out, Rebecca sent out on the email, so that's out there too. So, and this is Lottie Moon month for the giving for foreign missions, so don't forget that as well. And the children's program is this morning, right, Stan? Yeah, so it's this morning, so probably have a number of visitor families here, so be sure to say hello to our visitors this morning. All right, anything else before we get started this morning? Okay, nothing, good. All right, who wants to open us in prayer then, please? Jill, while you're roaming around, why don't you open us in prayer? Amen. Thank you, Jill. Isn't there a Christmas song about wandering or something? What is that? What's the We Three Kings? There. Yeah, there it is. Thank you, Stan. So this came into my head for some strange reason. Okay, so the lesson this morning is titled, He is Risen. He is risen. He is risen.
He is risen indeed.
Thank you. So finally got it there. So yeah, we're a little out of sync. Yeah, Jill, we're a little out of sync here that we're studying the resurrection here in the midst of the first Advent. So, but next Sunday we will have a Christmas lesson entitled "The Forgotten Man." So we'll have that, and then the following Sunday, if all goes as planned, we'll do kind of a wrap up on Mark, and then as we begin the new year, we'll return to Genesis, the beginning. That's the plan. So we'll see how that works out. So with that, if you recall, we've just in recent weeks have studied the lessons of Jesus' death, then his burial, and as I said, today is his resurrection. So those are the three components of the gospel message. So Jesus has been crucified. He's dead and buried, as we will talk about in our lesson today. So what do you think the chief priests and the scribes are thinking at this time?
We finally got him.
Finally got him. Yeah. Yeehaw. Jan says they were saying yeehaw. Yeah. What's that saying? Was that just a comment on Jan, or was that a... Well, what's that, Jill? One earthquake had. Yeah, what have we done? Possibly some of them were thinking that. So I kind of think, though, like Jan and Martha, they're thinking, well, we finally got rid of this pesky Jesus. So I think they were thinking we can go back now to business as usual, and we don't have to deal with this guy who was disruptive and interrupting, hundreds of years of our leadership as such, if you want to call it that. And then what a surprise they were going to be in for when up from the grave Jesus arose. So that reminds me of one of my favorite all-time hymns, Up from the Grave He Arose. Y'all ever heard that hymn? Yeah, a lot of heads nodding. So it captures to me the triumph of Jesus' resurrection. And he has now triumphed over Christ, has triumphed over Satan, the grave, and sin. So let's take a few minutes, even though this is Christmas season. This is a Christmas song, Up from the Grave He Arose. So we're going to take a minute or two, Johnny, and let's listen to that, and then we'll dig into our verses in Mark today.
Waiting the coming day, Jesus
grew up in a pretty stoic denomination, and we could even get excited about that. So pretty unusual. We didn't have all the instruments, though, so if that gives you a hint. So again, people watching online, they say, he's got this backwards. This is Jesus' birth. We're starting from the end and going backwards here of the gospel. So, but anyway, I couldn't pass up an opportunity to listen to that hymn, one of my favorites. So, Martha, if you would read Mark chapter 16, the first 5 verses, please.
When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might come and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. And they were saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone from the entrance of the tomb for us?" And looking up, they noticed that the stone had been rolled away, for it was extremely large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting at the right, wearing a white robe, and they were amazed.
All right, so who is it that came to Jesus' tomb that we hear about in these verses? Mary Magdalene. Who else? Mary the mother of James, and yeah, Jill said Salome. Is that how you pronounce it? Salome. That's what I thought. Salome. Okay, Salome. So, is this all the women that are recognized in the gospel that came to Jesus' tomb? Bible trivia time. I'll give you a hint. There's one more. Anybody want to make a guess? One
the
more
mother
woman
of
came to the tomb.
Joses.
Now, that's the mother of Joseph. That's Mary, the mother of Joseph, yeah. In Luke's gospel, it mentions Joanna also was among this group of women that came to the tomb. What? So somebody's just stuttering, yeah. So just a little bit of review. What do we know about Mary Magdalene? We've talked about her. What do we know? Had demons, yeah, had spirits that Jesus healed her of, yes. And where was she from? Magdala, yeah, so we know that about her. So what about Mary, the mother of James? What do we know about that Mary? Another one of the Marys, and this James is not James of the James and John brothers. This is the other apostle James that she's the mother of. And then Salome, what do we know about her? Not much, is that what you said? She's related to Mary, the mother of Jesus. How is she related? She's Mary, the mother of Jesus' sister. She is the mother of James and John. So what do you know about Joanna, this new person we've just brought into the picture? She's the wife of the steward for Herod. So her husband had a prominent place as being steward to Herod Antipas. So she is also one of the women who is listed as being cured of evil spirits and infirmities. So again, as we look at these women, we talked about this last week. Becky brought this point that the more we look at these women, the more I'm amazed about the faith and the leadership that these women showed through this time of Jesus' crucifixion and burial. So unfortunately, oftentimes in the church, the capital C church, not necessarily Hope Baptist, but in capital C church, we see more and more today where women are taking the lead and men are on the fringes, let's say. So fortunately, we've got a lot of good men leaders in this church. That's not necessarily true across the Big C church, the church, Jesus' church. So evidently, as they come to the tomb, Mary Magdalene ran ahead of the other women, and she arrived at the tomb first. And why did they, just initially, why did they go to the tomb? What were they planning to do? They anoint Jesus for his burial, right? So the apostles had gone into hiding at this time, it seems, and they had gone into hiding out of fear of being associated with Jesus, and they were afraid that they would suffer the same fate as Jesus did, being killed, being crucified. But here we see the women are bold, and they continue to serve Jesus, even though they believe, at this point, they believe he's dead. So, as we discussed in a couple of lessons ago, we called these the women of light. The women of light, capital L, light. So, what day of the week and what time was it when these women arrived at the tomb? It was the first day of the week. At sunrise. Thank you, Kim. So Mark 16:1 says what Kim says when the Sabbath was over, so the Sabbath was Saturday, the Sabbath begins just before sundown each Friday through the completion of nightfall on Saturday. So then Kim tells us in Mark 16:2 tells us this: very early on the first day of the week, which is Sunday, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. So it was sunrise on Sunday when these women arrive at the tomb to, as Kim said, to anoint Jesus' body. So this is an important event as such in Christian history. What is this event, Mark, here that we see Jesus leaves the tomb sometime between crucifixion and now on Sunday morning early? What transpires after this? What changes? Thank you. Nancy says the disciples and the Christian church began worshiping on Sunday rather than Saturday. So this is the beginning of what we know as the first day of the week, the day of worship being Sunday versus Saturday. So the women had a concern as they went to the tomb. What was their concern? How are they going to get the stone out of the way? It says it's an extremely large stone, is in front of the tomb. This most likely would have been a big round stone like you might see on the Flintstones on one of their cars or something. And it was at a slant, so it was easy to roll it down in front of the opening to the tomb, but it had been very hard to roll it back uphill out of in front of the tomb. So they were concerned about how we're going to get this stone out of the way. So what was the reaction of the women upon approaching and entering the tomb? They were amazed. So depending on your translation, the Gospel of Mark uses this word amazed 12 times in his Gospel. So here we see the women are amazed. Luke's Gospel provides even more narrative, more detail around this reaction of the women. So Martha, if you would read Luke chapter 24, verses 4 through 7, please.
And while they were perplexed about this, behold, two men suddenly stood near them in dazzling clothing. And as the women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, "Why do you seek the living one among the dead? He is not here, but he has risen. Remember how he spoke to you while he was still in Galilee, saying that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the third day rise again."
All right, thank you, Mark. So these women were amazed when they reached the tomb. What caused them to be amazed? All right, when they look into the tomb, the tomb was empty. Jesus' body wasn't there. That was one thing that amazed them. What else?
There were two men there.
There were two angels. Luke's Gospel say there were two men, two angels there. Mark's Gospel only references one of them. And this someone who is an angel was sitting inside the tomb. And Mark refers to him as a young man wearing white. Matthew's Gospel tells us the angel's appearance was like lightning, and his clothing was as white as snow. So there's one other thing they were amazed at as they approached the tomb. What was it? The stone was rolled away. So they were amazed, who did this? How did it happen? So it was rolled away. So they had at least three things to be amazed about when they came to the tomb. So John's gospel tells us there were two angels. Mark only refers to one angel. So, and maybe because only one of the angels spoke, why would there have been two angels? As a witness to what, Jill? Yeah. So possibly a good reason, as Jill said, is the requirements of Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 15. And Jesus also quoted this verse, Deuteronomy 19:15, in Matthew 18:16. And in Matthew 18:16, it says, "But if he does not listen to you, take one or two more with you, so that on the testimony of two or three witnesses, every matter may be confirmed." So, the Bible records that angels were very much involved in the joyous announcement of Jesus' birth. Here we are at this time of year when we celebrate Jesus' birth. Angels were involved in that. Thousands, myriads of angels were involved. And here we see two angels involved in the announcement of the wondrous reality, joyous reality of Jesus' resurrection. So angels were involved at the beginning of Jesus' life on earth, and now we see them involved now as he goes back to eternity as such. So if you recall, the religious authorities had asked that there be guards placed at the tomb. What happened to them? Yeah, I don't think they necessarily moved that stone, no. So they maybe not asleep, well, maybe asleep, maybe depends on how you interpret that. So Matthew's gospel tells us that the guards shook from fear of him, the angels, and became like dead men. So maybe they're asleep, if you want to say that. I think they fainted away. Yeah, so that may be sleep. So after the guards recover from fainting, they run off to report what's happened. Okay? So of whom were the guards fearful? And probably fearful on one level. They were fearful for their lives. Nancy said, why would they be fearful for their lives? Yeah, that was their assignment. So if they have failed in their guard duty as such, the penalty could be death. We see that doesn't happen to them for a reason, but the penalty could be death. Why else would they might be fearful? Yeah. Unnerving to see what happened. What do you think they might have seen? They might have seen Jesus, yeah. Might have seen Jesus. The stone being rolled away. We're going to talk about that in a minute. I think they might have been fearful. They might have been witness to the angels. Every time you hear of angels in the Bible, the reaction is fear and typically bowing down, falling to the ground. So I think that the other possibility is that they could have been, Matthew's gospel tells us, the guards shook from fear of him and became like dead men. I think those are the angels. So Matthew 28:2 says, "For an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came," and what did he do? He rolled away the stone. So we know that the stone was rolled away by the angel, and the angel then sat on the stone. So it makes you believe the guards saw the angel and what he did. So, all right, so part of the story of resurrection of Jesus is not told in any of the Gospels. What is not told, and why is it not told? Yeah, we're going to get into that in a minute. Jan was saying that some earlier manuscripts don't include the Mark 16:9 through or 9 through, I didn't think it went all the way to 20, but part of Mark's gospel is not included in earlier manuscript. What's that? No, not talking about where he cast out the demons, but here in this part of the gospel story, none of the 4 gospels report
Where Jesus was
where Jesus was.
during his death.
Yeah, from the 3 days. Now the Gospels, there is some scripture around that indicates where Jesus might have been. It's interpreted that way in those 3 days. But none of the 3 Gospels actually talk about the resurrection itself. What happened with Jesus itself? The guards had fainted away, so they don't see it. None of the women who came, he's already resurrected. So none of the Gospels actually tell us about the specific event itself. So why not? Why not is because what's important is that Jesus arose, not the process itself. So it wasn't necessarily significant. So Martha, if you would read on Mark chapter 16, verses 6 through 8.
But he said to them, "Do not be amazed. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who's been crucified.
All right, so what did the angel first tell the women in Mark 16:6? Don't be afraid, and he's arisen, and not to be amazed. He told them, don't be amazed. So why would the angel tell them not to be amazed? What other reaction could they have had? I mean, wouldn't you be amazed? What other reaction could they have had? And why would the angel tell them that? They could have been afraid, certainly, fearful. Yes, Becky? Yeah. They thought, the common thought was that that maybe somebody had stolen Jesus' body. Jamie, you were going to say something, I think. Yeah. Jamie says the reason they shouldn't be amazed, and the angel tells them, Jesus has told you that he was going to rise, and here it's happened, so why are you amazed as such? You should recall. So what else did the angel tell the women there in those verses?
I didn't finish reading the verses.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, read on. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
He is not here. See, here is the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had gripped them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry. I was thinking ahead and just assumed you'd read all that. So, okay, so now, what else did the angel tell the women? He told them not to be amazed, and then what did he tell them? Go tell the disciples and Peter. What else did he tell them?
Where he was going to be.
What's that?
Where he was going to be.
Where is he going to be, and where is he going to be? He's going to Galilee. Jesus is going into Galilee, and then finally he told them what? You will see Jesus in Galilee, just as Jesus had told you before. So the angel singles out Peter for the women to tell that Jesus is risen. Why would the angel single out Peter? Because, Alice says, because he had denied him 3 times. So Peter denied Jesus 3 times. He then abandoned Jesus for fear. And probably we'll see later that Peter was in most likely deep remorse over what he had done. And so Jesus, we're speculating here, wanted for Peter to be encouraged that he had risen because of Peter's past action. So why else might he have told Peter, or specifically told the women to tell Peter that he had risen? Yeah, Peter was the leader, so it could be because that Peter was the leader that he wanted him to know that Jesus is risen, and then maybe Peter then could pull together the other disciples as such. And so Galilee was a podunk area, or it was perceived as a podunk area. So Jerusalem was the center of the Jewish religion. The temple was in Jerusalem. So why would Jesus go to Galilee after his resurrection rather than going to the center of the Jewish religious, sect there at the temple in Jerusalem? Why was he going to Galilee? Why did he go to Galilee? Yeah. Nancy says that the disciples were from Galilee, and more than likely that's where they fled in fear, was back home. So Jesus would have gone back to Galilee to see his disciples. He told them they were going to see him. So that's certainly, I think, part of the reason. Is there any other reasons?
It says just as he told you, so he had already told them that that's where he would be.
He'd already told them he was going back to Galilee, yeah. And it was because, one reason is because the apostles, the 11 apostles, were from Galilee, so he could be going back, obviously, to connect with them. What else? Prophecy. Excuse me. So Jamie quotes some Matthew verses about the fulfillment of prophecy that Jesus would go back to Galilee. Certainly. Galilee was also where the greatest number of Jesus' followers were. That's where most of his ministry was conducted, was in Galilee. So he would be going back to where he was best received, where he would connect with those believers, as well as Galilee was his home. That's where he grew up. So he could be going back to his home as well by going back to Galilee. So what was the reaction of the women in Mark 16:8? They were shaken up. They were astonished and afraid. They were speechless. They were, it says, physically trembling. So they had a very stark, I guess you might say, reaction to what they've now heard and seen. So Martha, read on to verses 9 through 11, and we'll mention Jan's comment.
Now after he had risen early on the first day of the week, he appeared to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went and reported to those who had been with him while they were mourning and weeping. And when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they refused to believe it.
All right, thank you, Mark. So in Mark 16:9 through 20, as Jan said, that those verses may be marked in brackets in your translation. And the reason is that these verses were added later, possibly added later, and not included in the original text. Well, we're not going to go off on that side road as why they're not in the original text, but the verses are substantiated in the other Gospels in terms of what's related in Mark. So that is there. So after his resurrection, who did Jesus first appear to and why? Mary Magdalene, and why? Because he cast out the 7 demons from Mary. So, what's that? He knew that she believed, that she was a believer, certainly. She was a very faithful obedient servant to his, certainly. So it could be that because she was that faithful, obedient servant, that Jesus was rewarding her as such with his first appearance after his resurrection. Yes, Becky? She wasn't hiding. She was out there where he was. So, yeah. So, in other words, it could be opportunity. She was there where Jesus was. So, it could be that it was just simple opportunity. Mary was at the tomb. And so, Martha, if you would read and talking about these verses, John chapter 20, verses 14 through 18.
When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, and did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" And supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Stop clinging to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brethren and say to them, I ascend to my Father and your Father, and my God and your God." And Mary Magdalene came, announcing to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord," and that he had said these things to her.
All right, so what did Mary do after her encounter with the risen Jesus? Yeah, she did as she was told. She went and told the disciples and that the tomb was empty and Jesus was not there, and she reported as she was supposed to do. So what were the disciples doing when Mary arrived to report to them that she'd seen Jesus? They were weeping and mourning. So, and what was the reaction of the disciples to Mary's report? They didn't believe her. They refused to believe Mary's report. So why would the disciples have reacted as they did? What could have caused them not to believe Mary's report? Oh, Jamie says they let doubt creep in from everything that Jesus had told them. Certainly that's true. Yeah. So possibly that they could have thought Mary, she had been healed of 7 spirits, so she'd already had what we might term mental illness as such. So they thought, well, she's gone back off the deep end. She thinks Jesus is alive. So they could have thought that. What else? Yeah. Yeah.
And what they had seen also. They had seen him dead.
Yeah. Yeah, so, and their expectation was that he was dead. So had preconceived notions that everything they'd seen and heard it kind of left them, as you said, and they had this preconceived notion that Jesus was dead. So they couldn't fathom what Mary was telling them. But not being too hard on the apostles, how many times do we allow preconceived notions to bring us to incorrect conclusions? A lot of times we fall in that same trap that we have a preconceived notion and we come to a wrong conclusion. So here the disciples, the apostles did the same. They hear Mary, but it can't be right. So what did Peter do upon hearing Mary's report of the empty tomb? He went to see it for himself. So we're told that Peter and John ran to the tomb. John must have been with Peter when Mary reported that Jesus had risen or the tomb was empty. So John's gospel in John chapter 20, verses 3 3 through 10 records the response of Peter and John to Mary's report of the empty tomb. So, Martha, if you would read that, John 20, verses 3 through 10.
So Peter and the other disciple went forth, and they were going to the tomb. The two were running together, and the other disciple ran ahead faster than Peter and came to the tomb first. And stooping and looking in, he saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. And so Simon Peter also came following him and entered the tomb, and he saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the face cloth which had been on his head not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. So the other disciple who had first come to the tomb then also entered, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. So the disciples went away again to their own homes.
All right, so in these verses Martha just read from John 20, what's the description of the linen clothes? They were just lying there. So unlike Lazarus, if you remember when Lazarus arose from the dead, what happened to the linen clothes?
They had to take him off.
They
had to take them off.
They had to take them off of him because he came stumbling out of the tomb all wrapped up for embalmment as such. So the linen clothes are still wrapped around him. But here we see the linen clothes, the wrappings are left behind. We're told they're unmoved. So what occurred with the face cloth, which had covered Jesus' head? Yeah, it was rolled up, it was folded neatly, it was placed in by itself. So what are the lessons from the face cloth? Would we take anything away from that? Means he's coming back, you think? Why is that, Roger? That's interesting.
Because back when, say, the servant, served the master, that's what I've always heard. But if he was done with his meal, he'd crumble up his cloth and throw it on the table. But if he was not done with the meal, was planning on coming back to it, he would neatly fold up his napkin, so they would know that he's coming back to eat later.
Wow, very interesting. I never heard that before. Read that too. So it's a reference to the second advent, I guess. Then, very good, Roger. Yeah. Does he ever throw his down just all crumpled up? He's always coming back. He never how much come back to. He's eating it all. Yeah. So, well, that's a lot more theological response than I've got. So I had the lesson is make up your bed. So but really seriously, I think it also says God is a God of order and neatness, and we are to follow his example and do things orderly and neatly. But I really like Roger's answer too. It's prophetic that he's coming back. So good. So John 20, verse 8 says, So the other disciples had first come to the tomb also entered then and saw and believed. So what did John, the other disciple, see and believe? That he's gone. Yeah, John saw the empty tomb, so Jesus isn't there. So some theologians think that John then believed that Jesus had arisen because the tomb was empty. Others believe, somebody said a minute ago that they thought that, I think Becky said that they thought that Jesus' body had been stolen then, had been taken away, that's why it was empty. So the next verse says, For they did not yet understand the scripture and that he must rise from the dead. So what was this reaction of Jesus and John in seeing the empty tomb? They were amazed. Do you think they got it yet? No, still don't think they got it. So I think that John chapter 20 verses 9 and 10 indicates they still didn't get it. They still did not understand. They went home, probably back into hiding wherever they were, even after seeing the empty tomb and hearing Mary's account of seeing Jesus. It appears Peter and John still didn't get it. So, from that though, after Jesus' first appearances to Mary, but after that in the Gospels and further writings, we learn of a number of additional appearances of Jesus in his resurrected state. Do you recall some of these appearances? What are they? Who else sees Jesus in his resurrected state? 500 sees Jesus. It's a number of these. I got to check them off, so don't miss any. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 6, it says, over 500 disciples at once saw Jesus. The location is not specified there where that happened. What other times? The road to Emmaus, the two men on the road to Emmaus in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus appeared to them. Yep.
In the upper room with his disciples.
In the upper room with his disciples in John 20, we learn of that, the 10 of the disciples in the upper room. All right, the next we also learn is the second appearance in the upper room when Thomas was among them too. So there were 10. The first time was there were 10 disciples, and then there were 11 when Thomas joins them the next time. The breakfast on the seashore. Let me find that one. Yep. Where is that one? Yeah, John, I think that's John 21. They were fishing on the Sea of Galilee, and 7 of the disciples were there, and Jesus cooked breakfast for them. Okay. Where else? Okay, in 1 Corinthians 15 also it mentions that he appeared to James and then all the apostles as well. Yep. That's another one. This is going to lead somewhere here in a minute. Where else? What else? Well, I don't know. I don't know, Jamie. Is it? He did appear to Paul on the road to Damascus. Yes, Acts chapter 9. Yep. The ascension. No, he appeared in the ascension, and where did I have that one? Luke 24 is at the Mount of Olives near Bethany at his ascension. Yep. Where else? There's others. Galilee was, if I remember, don't quote me on this, Jill, but I think it's about 60 miles. Yeah. So Galilee, Nazareth is in Galilee, so his hometown was in Galilee. So, yeah. So I'm assuming Galilee, Nancy probably has the geography a lot better than me. I think it's about 60 miles from Jerusalem. Is that right? All right. All right, here we go. Luke chapter 24, verse 34, he appears to Peter. Matthew 28, verses 9 and 10, he appears to additional women. Matthew chapter 28, he appears to the 11 disciples or apostles on a mountain in Galilee. In Luke 24, he appears to a group of disciples in Jerusalem having dinner and recalling their experiences. In Acts chapter 7, verse 55, he appears to Stephen standing at the right hand of God, or Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And then in Revelation chapter 1, he appears to John in the Revelation. So those are tricky. All right, so a number of appearances and quite a few people Jesus appeared to. So if you were an attorney and you were in a trial, what evidence would you present to prove your case that Jesus rose from the grave? Yes, Beck. Don't see what? You don't, you don't see any physical evidence. Okay. Jamie? Eyewitness accounts. You have multiple eyewitness accounts. Yeah. What else? Yeah. Take a field trip to the tomb, which I think, Becky, would be physical evidence. The tomb is empty. So, it's a lack of physical evidence that he didn't, something didn't happen to him. So, yeah. So, but there was an empty tomb. So that you would say, well, yeah, but they stole his body. Why would you, if you were the attorney presenting evidence, say, well, that couldn't be true? Why? What would be your? Why would they want to? The theory is to prove the myth that he arose from the grave, but why would that not be the case? Yeah, Becky? Yeah, so what happened to the two guards? That's a good question, Becky. What happened to them? Martha, read Matthew 28:11 through 14.
Now, while they were on their way, some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priest all that had happened. And when they had assembled with the elders and consulted together, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers and said, "You are to say, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this should come to the governor's ears, we will win him over and keep you out of trouble."
Okay. So, Jeff, you want to say something? No. Oh, you didn't know I was a mind reader, did you? So Jeff was saying that the Sadducees and Pharisees thought that this could happen, that more than likely that somebody would steal his body, not that he arose. I don't think necessarily they thought that, maybe so. They feared his arising, Jeff says, either that their disciples stole his body or that it was real. So, but why do you think, do you really give any credence that the disciples would steal his body? What were they doing? They were cowering, hiding, and more than likely, it seems they were in Galilee, some distance away. So, don't think that was, excuse me, sorry. Don't think that was the case. So, what else? Oh, yes, Helen. Yeah. Helen's saying that the Romans would want to try to prove that he didn't arise from the grave, that he wasn't resurrected, and they would have put out an all points bulletin to find his body. So, good point. Another piece of evidence. So, how many people is recorded as denying Jesus' resurrection? No one. No one is specifically recorded as denying his resurrection. So there's another piece of evidence. And then after the disciples, the apostles come to believe that, hey, here's Jesus. He is risen from the grave. What do they go on to do? The apostles. They preach the gospel and give their lives. So if Jesus hadn't really risen from the grave, why would they be willing to die for him? Yeah, why would they die for a lie? So even...
What I want to know is what happened to the people that
foot of your mouth.
How did they feel, after they had these eyewitnesses accounts? They must have known that it was real, that it really happened.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
what
I
did-
think how they felt was that they tried to suppress the rise of Christianity, and you see, great persecution breaking out in Jerusalem, and we usually credit that to the Romans, but more than likely the Jews were part of that as well.
yeah, but still, they knew the truth. So how did they? I mean, I would have been a little nervous about about telling the lie when I knew that it had really happened, and
That's a really good point. How many people know the truth today and go on about living a lie? Well,
but they knew the truth. I mean,
a lot of
they knew
people
the
even
truth.
today know the truth, but they say, I don't want to accept this truth today. I'm going to wait till later. Yeah. Yeah. Nancy says that it, like the women, they were told to go and tell, but they were frightened. They were scared, and they kept their mouth. At least some of them kept their mouth shut. We hear that Mary went on and told Peter and John, but we don't hear about the other women. They were too frightened. So, again, I don't think people who are evil may know the truth in a lot of things, but not willing to accept it. So, all right. Mhm. Yeah. Jeff saying in Time magazine, the cover had a quote or something like, and had a picture of a supposed picture of Jesus on it. It says, "How do you deal with Jesus?" Everyone has to answer that question. If you don't answer it and you avoid it, you've answered it. You don't deal with him. So the last piece of evidence, and we're going to tie the resurrection to Jesus' birth next week. Impossible, you say, but we're going to do it as we finish up this lesson. But the last piece of evidence, here you have old doubting Thomas. And Thomas says, I'm not going to believe this till I stick my hand in his side and see the nail prints in his hands. And Thomas comes to believe. So I can see in a trial here, one of my prime witnesses would be Thomas. I would bring to the stand and say, Thomas, you didn't believe, but what did you see and feel with your own eyes? And have him testify. So again, I think even if you weren't Perry Mason, you could win this trial and defend that Jesus arose. So aren't we glad? So yes, we'll go to the first Advent. From the second Advent, we got it all flip-flopped here. We're going from the second Advent to the first Advent next week, but we will touch and finish up a little bit on the second Advent as well next week. So thank you for being here. Have a blessed week, and have a blessed, continue to have a blessed Christmas season. See you next Sunday.